Tonight on Greater Boston, with Joe Biden promising significantly more help to Ukraine as they continue to fight against Russian invaders. Two experts join me on how and if this war will ever end. Then, with Boston gearing up for Juneteenth celebration this week and beyond, King Boston Executive Director Imari Paris Jeffries joins me on how his organization plans to honor the holiday and how we should be honoring it as well. President Biden promised Ukrainian President Zelensky today that the U.S. will ship another $1 billion of weapons and supplies in the coming days, as Ukraine goes on 4 months since Russia began its brutal invasion. And while the fighting has made it impossible to get an accurate count of how many Ukrainians have been killed, most estimates put the number at tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians. Several thousand civilians were killed in the city of Mariupol alone, which is now under Russian control. And while Ukrainians have mounted a remarkable defense, beating back Russian forces outside Kyiv, stalling the invasion across much of western Ukraine, Kremlin forces have taken over much of the east and are closing in on total control of the Donbass region. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also met with a group of around 50 other countries in Brussels today with the aim of sending more help. But is it enough? Can Ukraine prevail? And what of U.S.-Russia relations going forward? Joined by Tom Nichols. Tom's an international affairs expert, regular contributor to The Atlantic, and author of its Peacefield newsletter. Carol Saivetz is a senior advisor for MIT's Security Studies program and a research associate at Harvard's Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies and the Harvard Ukrainian Institute. Carol, Tom, thanks. Good to see you both.
Thank you.
Carol, it started with the conventional wisdom was a slaughter for the Russians in a week. Then it moved on to the Ukrainians are holding their own, the brave Ukrainians. Maybe they might actually even win. And the last few days, it's, well, Russia is regaining an advantage, again, as the conventional wisdom. What do you assess as the current state of affairs?
Well, I think that story is pretty accurate. It looks like it's sort of evolving into a war of attrition. Tom can talk more about the military situation than I can. A war of attrition between the Ukrainian troops and the Russian troops. My understanding is that the Ukrainians are running out of the Soviet-era ammunition that they would need to continue the fight. And the terrain is very different in the Donbass from what it was around Kiev and Kharkiv. The Ukrainians claim to be making some small gains back around Kherson to the south, but it's not clear exactly what's going on. And in terms of, manpower and materiel, the Russians certainly have it hands down over the Ukrainians.
Tom, what do you want to add to that?
Carol's right. And the thing you have to bear in mind is that there was a lot of over-exuberant prediction of ultimate Ukrainian victory a little too early in this conflict because the Ukrainians were doing so well. And it's important to point something out. The Russians, by their own goals, have lost this war. The Russians went to war to capture Ukraine whole, to see Kiev collapse, to drive out the Zelensky government. They failed. And in that sense, they have lost this war. This is now a different war where they are just going to grind away at the eastern edge of Ukraine, meter by meter, and kill people I think mostly because the Ukrainians are simply being defiant at this point. And in that kind of a struggle, time and attrition are not on the side of the Ukrainians fighting a much bigger power surrounding them on three sides. So, the narrative, as Carol pointed out, the narrative's right that the Ukrainians, I was one of the people who thought they would be hit pretty hard and potentially collapse. Then they fought back. They won the Battle of Kiev, but this is a different war now, and it's going to be a long slog of attrition that is going to really take a lot out of the Ukrainians.
Tom, staying with you, my inexpert analysis is the public in this country has lost interest, or at least redirected our interest to the price of gas, which makes it easier for our leaders not to do as much as they should. Are we doing enough? Is the United States doing enough to help Ukraine?
I don't think anyone's doing enough throughout the free world, but we're also doing a lot. And I think there's been a false dichotomy in the debate about this, which is that if we're not doing everything, then some people think we're doing nothing. We're doing quite a lot. We can do more. The Europeans can do more.
What should we be doing? What's the more that we're not doing?
Faster deliveries of better weapons. Pick up the tempo, pick up the training, make sure those weapons get there, cut through a lot of the red tape. Some of this isn't really about hesitancy on our part or NATO's part. It's just that we are big, clumsy, bureaucratic organizations that have a hard time shipping things around. So I think that the only way that we can really help here is to make this painful enough for the Russians to slow down. You're not going to negotiate with them. You're not going to convince Putin that he was wrong. You just have to make it so that the Ukrainians can keep inflicting a really high price on the Russians. And we can do that, but we have to pick up the pace and send and keep sending better weapons.
Can I jump in?
Of course.
I think one of the issues is that the Biden administration has been particularly fearful of crossing some imaginary line that would somehow get us into a head-to-head conflict with the Russians. You know, we'll send them weapons that only extend X miles, but don't have the range for Y miles and things like that. And at some point, the Russians have the ability, because of their missile capabilities, of hitting Lviv or hitting other parts of Ukraine that have not been hit very regularly, including taking out the arms depots of the material that we're already providing to the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians are really not retaliating. There have been fires, there have been, you know, minor helicopter raids and things like that, but they don't have the capability to attack like the missile launchers inside Russian territory.
Well, Carol, is it unfair to say, I'm so glad you brought up that point. I felt throughout this that Putin is determining the terms of engagement. When he says crossing a line we will consider as being a direct attack on Russia, then we don't do that thing. I mean, is he not calling the shots? Is that unfair?
It certainly seems that way, Jim. I'm not gonna disagree with you. You know, every time he mentions the word nuclear weapons or their nuclear arsenal, we suddenly say, "Oh my God, we can't do anything more."
And Poland can't send planes because even if we use this backdoor method, this was like a month ago, we will consider that a direct attack on Russia. So enough of that.
Right. So we're hamstrung, at least by this perception that we do not want to provoke the Russians and that we do not want to take the risk that Putin might indeed, if his back is against the wall, use a nuclear weapon or chemical weapons in Ukraine itself. I'm not convinced that the Russians would resort to nuclear weapons, although it is part of their military doctrine. If they feel that there's an existential threat, that they would be the first to use nuclear weapons. You
know, Tom, let me speak to you in your journalistic hat for a minute. It's sort of Pogo-esque. We have seen the enemy and it is us. My favorite national newspaper is the Washington Post. 2 Saturdays ago, on my phone, I counted the number of stories until we got to Ukraine. There were things that should have been up there that made a lot of sense. But then there was the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp trial. There were the best spots to visit on the Maryland shore. Number 27 was Ukraine. It seems to me when the press redirects its attention from something like that, Vladimir Putin, maybe not individually, but his people assess that they can be even more brutal because we're not paying close attention, because we're not seeing the carnage on our television screens at night. Is that a decent assessment?
I'm going to push back, Jim, and say that you can't blame the media for serving up junk food when that's what people want to read.
Well, I think you can,
welcome to democracy.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry, but I wish people cared more about Ukraine than they do about Johnny Depp. And I have, you know, banged the table about this my whole career. But I also think that the media is doing a really good job of reporting on what's actually going on if you are a citizen who cares enough to find out about it.
So.
And I want to leave my military hat on for a minute and say, you know, the fear of escalation problem is not something to just wave away. I mean, we are now in the biggest war. Europe is in the biggest war since the Nazis rolled east. There are 4 nuclear-armed countries involved in this conflict: the United States, Russia, Britain, and France. I'm not, I take Carol's point that I don't think that, the Russians are sitting around saying that, today is nuclear go day. I worry about Putin being reckless enough, because he was reckless enough to do this stupid thing to begin with, that he can set in motion, or we could accidentally set in motion, a chain of events that then leads to an escalatory spiral that we didn't want and that they didn't want. So while I take the point that I think it's not fair to say that Putin's been dictating this engagement, but I do think that fear of escalation and caution about escalation isn't something to just wave away. And the day it happens, we'll all wish we'd been more careful about it.
Tom, can I stay with you and quote you to you, if you don't mind? You wrote, Putin wants to stay in power. No, it's not a challenge. I'm looking for an explanation. The Russian public wants their constant sense of inferiority soothed by nationalistic television fantasies. The Russian elites want to stay out of prison. The Russian military wants to prove they're not a bunch of incompetent stumblebums. This isn't going to end soon. So what will cause it to end? What is the thing that will happen, or the set of things that finally brings this to a conclusion?
Vladimir Putin leaving power, either by the will of God or by action people around him. I think.
And if he doesn't, it never ends?
Right. I think that's absolutely right.
Carol,
Just like,
I agree
like the
with
Crimean
Tom.
War.
I agree with Tom on this, although I will say that it seems like there's some chipping around the edges. There are articles. In fact, Tom and I were corresponding on Facebook about this. There are more articles about, soldiers' mothers wanting to know where their children are, where their men, male children are.
Russian mothers.
Russian.
Yeah.
They're, this line that sanctions don't work are not hurting the Russian public enough. I just saw an article, NBC News, saying that the Russians have started producing cars again, but there are no airbags, no seat belts, no stabilizers in the cars, because they don't have the parts to produce it. So at some point, one would hope that it would catch up. I'm not sure it's to the point that there'll be a coup against Vladimir Putin. So actually, ultimately, I agree with Tom that whether it's by the grace of God or some military people taking action against him, because this is a thankless war. But I think we also have to be careful that what comes next may not be better. When it was rumored about a month ago that Putin was seriously ill, the person most spoken about was Nikolai Patrushev, who's even more hawkish than Putin is about prosecuting the war.
Well, on that note, I only have a minute left, but starting with you, Carol, but for both of you. So whether it's Putin or Putin 2.0, when this is finally over, can you describe what the relationship between the United States and that Russia is like, Carol?
Ooh. I think it's going to be very frosty for quite a while. I think that we'll deal with them. We'll deal with them ultimately where we have common interests or where our interests actually coincide. But I don't see any warming. They've withdrawn from all kinds of international bodies, whether they're academic or military or societal. So I don't see, it's not going to be reset 3.0, I guess, anytime soon.
How about you, Tom?
I agree with that. I think, the Russians, I was one of the people who argued for a much warmer relationship with the Russians 25 years ago, bring them in as NATO observers, the G8, all of that. They fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. The Russians are out of second chances. That this really has reset the clock all the way back to 1989 or 1990, where the Russians are just going to have to prove that they're capable of living in Europe as a civilized nation. And I don't think any of the Europeans are willing to extend that benefit of the doubt anymore. They were 30 years ago. But the one thing that's going to happen at the end of this is that Russia is going to be facing a NATO that is 32 countries, including Finland and Sweden. They did this to themselves, and they're not going to get out of it anytime soon.
Tom, I thought you were going to end with a George W. Bush, we won't get fooled again, but you stopped yourself in time. That was chilling, but Tom and Carol, thank you both. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jim.
Sunday will mark the second Juneteenth since being established as a federal holiday by President Biden last year. And several celebrations are planned across the city to mark the day that slaves in Texas, the last Confederate state with institutional slavery, were notified of their long overdue freedom more than 2 years after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Among the celebrations, King Boston's week-long Embrace Ideas Festival, for which GBH is a sponsor, by the way, kicked off Monday with a lineup of speakers including Yolanda Renee King, the only granddaughter of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott, Boston Foundation President Lee Pelton, Globe columnist Janae Osterhelt, and plenty more. I'm joined by the executive director of King Boston, Imari Paris Jeffries. Imari, it's great to see you.
Jim, great to see you again.
You know, I'm assuming that most people watching, because I was in this boat a while ago, know very little about the history of Juneteenth, don't know that it's been celebrated in many parts of the country for more than 150 years. Could you put a little flesh on the bare bones that I described a minute ago?
Yeah, it's a holiday that commemorates a time when the last folks who were enslaved found out that they were indeed free. It was based on a military order. And in some communities across the country, this final day in June, this Juneteenth, this day of emancipation has been celebrated. It's been a day of liberation, independence, and oftentimes celebrated almost like a 4th of July and that we celebrate in the country, but for the Black community. And so there's been a long-standing Juneteenth celebration here in Boston in Franklin Park that's been going on for years. And a lot of the elders of our community have been the sponsors of this event.
Do you worry that, I mean, Sunday will be celebrated on Monday as a federal holiday. Do you worry that this becomes like so many federal holidays, a day off and you go buy something on a discount and you don't spend a minute thinking about why we're commemorating anything?
I do worry about that. And I think, some of us have seen that recent controversy. I think there was a big box store in the country that was selling Juneteenth.
Yes, it was.
Ice cream and Juneteenth party favors. There was a museum in another part of the country that was for Juneteenth selling watermelon flavored salads, watermelon infused salads. And so, we are worried about Juneteenth being commodified and really commercialized in a way that the fictional Mexican holiday of Cinco de Mayo is kind of made into this day of red cups and wearing sarapes and painting mustaches on your face, or the way in which some folks who are not of Chinese descent celebrate Chinese New Year. And so I think there's a lot of us who are worried about this holiday being commodified in that way.
Which is, I assume, what gives birth to the Embrace Ideas Festival this week. And by the way, tomorrow, it's actually GBH is the sponsor of tomorrow. Can you give us a little taste of what has happened and what you intend? And most importantly, tell me what little 14-year-old granddaughter of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott had to say on Monday.
Yeah, and if you've never heard her speak, I mean, she's phenomenal. She is a phenomenal young person. And so there was on this panel on our first day with our partner, the Global Citizen Circle, we had Yolanda King and a young person from Boston really have an incredible conversation about the importance of youth activism and youth leadership in this moment. And so that's how we kicked off the day. And so it was an honor to have Martin Luther King III up here and Yolanda to kick off this holiday with us. And we'll hopefully see them back, or some of them back, for the unveiling of the King Memorial in January of next year.
And it's tomorrow at GBH, am I right? Reparations is the topic of the day?
Reparations, that's right, that's right. And so this idea of Juneteenth being a holiday that is centering Black people in our country, but also could be a day of learning, ideas, contemplation, et cetera. And so I think that is why King Boston, which is an organization committed to racial equity in the business of monuments, memorials, and symbols, feels like Juneteenth, as this new holiday that has emerged during the pandemic, is an opportunity for Boston to perhaps lead the country in showing the country how one might celebrate Juneteenth.
We should be clear. Most people associate King Boston with this incredibly beautiful thing that is being built that you referenced a minute ago, the Embrace, that'll be just stunningly beautiful, I think, on Boston Common. But spend a minute, that's not, in addition to the Ideas Festival, there's a deeper long-term purpose for King Boston that you're working on making happen. Could you briefly tell people what that is, Imari?
Yeah. And, King Boston is a racial equity organization that is at the intersection of a policy and research organizations. And so that's one of the things that we do, is that we create unique policy and research that is focused on anti-racism, that's focused on welcome and belonging. And so reparations is one of the things on our policy agenda. And we're an arts and culture organization. So part of our overall work is to build the Embrace, which will be unveiled next year, but also the Embrace Center. So this one-of-a-kind museum cultural experience in Roxbury that we're hoping to put in P3.
You know, the execution of George Floyd was both a time of obviously unimaginable horror, but following that, a time of almost unimaginable hope in the minds of a lot of people. We'd finally see police reform. There'd finally be serious talk about reparations. There'd be health equity, equity in social determinants. But a couple of years out, a police reform has disappeared on the federal level. Some level it has been implemented in a few places like Massachusetts. The wealth gap is still yawning. And at least by my look at things, we have white supremacy on the rise, suppression of voting rights of poor people and people of color in particular, a Supreme Court that in the next term, very possibly, is going to repeal the vestiges of affirmative action in higher education. Am I mischaracterizing the direction in which we've gone in these couple of years?
You know, I don't think you have, but I think with the type of forward momentum we've seen in the last few years prior to now, you know, we expected this type of pushback. And I think 400 years of a society and a culture that's rooted on white supremacy and a culture that started off with folks being enslaved isn't going to change overnight. And so I think part of our change work in Boston is thinking about this decade, 2020, which was the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower landing and Plymouth Plantation, and to 2030, which is the 400th anniversary of Boston. And so we're thinking about this 10 years as incremental change. And I think we have a lot to be excited about in Massachusetts through the emergence of our civic and our elected leaders and the type of conversations that we're having. I think Boston and Massachusetts is incredibly interested in keeping this momentum and the change at hand. I think the rest of the country, you know, we're seeing that pushback front and center. And so I'm hopeful about Massachusetts. I'm hopeful when I see things like the driver's license for undocumented folks be something that's passed recently. I'm hopeful that we are open-minded and optimistic around how we need to lean into including people in our state. And I think because Massachusetts is one of the storytelling cities of America, there's an echoing effect on what happens here, like healthcare reform, right? And so we're one of the states where that originated and the rest of the country followed suit. And so I think what happens in Massachusetts reverberates throughout the country. And so I'm optimistic about that.
Well, let me tell you, there's not nearly enough hope on this show, Imari, and thank you for providing a bit. Good luck the rest of the week, next week, and in the months ahead. We'll talk to you plenty, I'm sure. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. The Embrace Ideas Festival continues tomorrow when GBH hosts Day 4 from 11:30 in the morning to 5:30 p.m., concludes Friday at the Mass College of Art and Design, followed by the Embrace Ideas Block Party. That's in Nubian Square. For tickets, you can go to embraceideasfestival.org. That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow for another recap of the major takeaways from Day 3 of the January 6th hearings. Michael Curry of the NAACP and former New Hampshire GOP Chair Jennifer Horn will once again join me with their analysis. The hearing starts at 1 tomorrow. And a reminder, you can listen live on GBH Radio 89.7 with Marjorie Egan and me. You can also stream the hearings live at gbhnews.org or catch them live on the GBH World channel, which is offering a full re-airing at 3 a.m. the morning after each hearing as well. For now, thank you for watching, and please don't forget Ukraine.